Hello, I want to welcome everyone to the talk today. My name is Sarah Carell, founder of The Power of Our Story, Coffee and Conversation. And today we are celebrating Independence Day. We are coming together in appreciation of the freedoms and the strengths that we have in this country. And we are doing this by having a veterans and first responders storytelling jam session. So, the power of a story is it's all about connection. It's about providing a place, a platform for our protectors, a place of just safety, of familiarity. And because we really want a place for our protectors to be able to process with others who get it, their journey, and just to be able to, again, through transition or retirement, to have others that are going through the same journey. So we're doing this together. We're stronger together. We heal together. So today, I'm so excited to have retired Lieutenant Colonel and former Green Beret Scott Mann with us. I saw him on Facebook about 3 or 4 years ago, and he caught my attention because he came across with this very just confident, strong vulnerability. And I just hadn't seen that. I was just beginning this advocacy with our veterans. And I just thought, gosh, this guy, whoever he is, he seems like he's hitting the bullseye here of what I'm thinking we need to do to get into this gap of where we're losing our veterans to suicide. So again, I see Scott as being one of these builders, a bridge builder, somebody who creates strength in a group and a country and in leaders. So he talks a lot about his time in Afghanistan as a Green Beret, where you really have to connect with the Afghans there. That is what you have to do to empower them. So all his experiences there, he had a very tough transition, which is very common. So he brings all that, and he uses different formats, different platforms to tell the story. And it is empowering, it's inspiring, it's educational, and it really brings the protectors and the civilians together. So I'm so honored to have you, Scott, on this talk, and I welcome you, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. It's really an honor and an honor to kick this off. And I know that throughout the day, we're going to have amazing storytellers on here with different perspectives, different points of view, different experiences, different miles. And, those of you on right now listening and watching, I really appreciate it, whether it's live or the recording. I think what you're doing, Sarah, to bring storytelling to the forefront right around the Independence Day of the United States is critical. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that today and how I don't think we do that much anymore, and how we need to do it more. So today is just it's a super honor. I'm really thrilled to kick it off. And what I'm going to be talking about this Independence Day period is going to hopefully give some insights on the role that each one of us can play as leaders, to lead our country, and not just the United States, Canada, a range of countries back into the sunlight coming out of a rough time. So, as I thought about when you asked me to do this, we've been actually at the beach for a couple of days with my 3 sons and my wife, Monty. My 3 boys are grown. We're officially empty nesters now. My oldest son, Cody, is a platoon leader in the Big Red 1. 1st Infantry Division. My middle son, Cooper, is on his path to becoming a federal agent. And my youngest son, Braden, is pursuing a baseball career. He wants to play for the Yankees. So we'll see what happens. But those are my man cubs. Those are the boys that I raised, and my wife raised during the longest war in our nation's history. All they've known really in their young lives is war. Now that may seem odd, but it's true. For them, all they've known is war. It's every aspect of their memory. It's every aspect of their experience. It has shaped everything about them from the time they could walk, from the time they could talk. All they've known is combat. And they've known it from the perspective of little boys who didn't, get the straight scoop on what was happening. They didn't get the all the details. But kids are smart. We know this. I mean, kids are very intuitive. They know what's going on way before we think they do. And I've learned so many things from my boys now that they're grown, and one of them is an infantry lieutenant. I know now way more about what their experience was than I ever possibly imagined. And it was prolific, the way that it affected them. So I've been working on this conversation for a couple of days now, and I like to I am a storyteller, and I do believe in dynamic engagement. So I didn't want to overthink this, but I did put some thought into what's the right approach for today. What's the right way to kick this off? What's the position that I should play for all of the amazing storytellers who are going to follow me? And I looked over at my three sons, and they were playing spike ball on the little net out there on the beach. The sun was going down, and I was just sitting there and I was looking at them, and their mom, was kind of sitting off to the side, and she was just watching them with such admiration. And I don't know, I thought, what if we left these guys? What world will these young men and their friends and young women inherit? What if we left them? What has been our gift to them? What have we bequeathed them? Because let's face it, for most of us on here, we're going to have an impact in the world, and we'll continue to have an impact in the world. But I think we can probably agree that whatever it is that needs to be fixed, it's not going to be our generation that's going to fix it. And I'm starting to realize that more and more. It's going to be theirs. It's going to be their generation that will have a true run at this, and will probably have the best chance of bringing our country back together, of healing the wounds that are there, and leading us into better days. And that's hard for me sometimes to think about, because I want to be the one to fix it. I want to be the one to make it better. There's a line in the play that I wrote that's now a film called Last Out, where my character Danny Patton, has been informed from his son that he's joining the army, and Danny loses it. Like, he loses it, and he's having a big blowout with his wife Lynn about his son joining the army, and he's put his foot down, and he's not going to allow it. And she finally screams at him, "What is this all about?" And he says, "How can I let my son fight a war that I didn't finish?" And for me, that is how I feel in so many ways about things in the country. It's how I feel about things in the world. It's, I'm not finished. I'm not done. And I don't intend to be done for quite some time. But I look at these three young men who were out there on the beach, for a few moments, reverting back to the 12-year-old, 10-year-old, and 8-year-old that they once were. But I know very, very soon that the world is going to place a heavy load on their shoulders. In fact, my oldest son, it already is. And so this July 4th, that's what's on my mind, is what kind of country are we leaving our children? And how have we prepared them to lead us through this, and what would we share with them? And so that's where I'm coming at today on this. Is my perspective is I'd like to share with you what I tried to prepare my boys for. I'm going to share with you what I say to them all the time, the things that I believe that we need to do as leaders, as citizens of the world and of our nation and of our community, as family members, just as leaders, like what I believe we need to do to lead into better days. please know that this is not coming from a position of authority or, this one time at band camp. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. This is mostly rooted in failure. It's rooted in mistakes that I've made. It's rooted in men that I've lost. It's rooted in just a lot of miles run. As a former Green Beret, I spent a lot of time in trust depleted, high risk places. I just did. And whether that was Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Afghanistan, Iraq, I found myself by design operating in places that were very, very trust depleted, and where the stakes were very, very high, and where a handful of leaders had to go local and make an impact that was ultimately, hopefully, strategic. And I got to be around those leaders. And most of what I'm going to talk about, I was gifted from them. I was gifted from these amazing sergeants and warrant officers and citizens of foreign countries who taught me ways to read people. And I mean, really, really read people, ways to connect below most levels of human consciousness, and then to move very reluctant people to take action that they otherwise wouldn't take, to move them up onto their rooftops and fight back as a community, as a collective. And that's when I started calling it rooftop leadership, is the ability to inspire other people to take action that they otherwise would not take in very high stakes, low trust situations. And that's what I want to talk about today. And that approach to leadership, empowered leadership at a local community level. And I think if we can do that, we can go into this day and into the 4th of July and beyond with a perspective maybe of what are we up against here? What are we really up against? And what are we facing? One of the things in special operations that we have these imperatives that we live by. And the first special ops imperative is always know your operational environment. Like, that's rule number one, always know your operational environment. And so I want to start with that is what kind of country are Cody, Cooper, and Braden inheriting? Well, first of all, I think there's 3 ways to look at your operational environment. One is the environment itself, the arena, as I like to call it. The second is the human terrain. And the third is yourself, to look at yourself. Sun Tzu said it best: know the enemy, know yourself. And so I want to just take a couple of minutes to frame out where we are and what we're up against right now. First of all, the environment. There's an acronym in the military called VUCA: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And that term was created after the fall of the Soviet Union by military strategists to try to describe the complex world that we were inheriting, that was no longer bipolar. It was now multifaceted, very unpredictable, very dynamic as the Cold War came to an end. And I believe that term VUCA is very, very appropriate to the world we live in now. I mean, just for example, think about COVID and all of the things that have come with it over the last year plus. Think about the levels of volatility that has brought into your arena, where you live and where you work and where you play. And you've become adjusted to it to some degree because you're a human and that's what we do. But the level of volatility that is now almost, we almost don't raise an eyebrow at it, but the peaks and valleys of volatility in our businesses, in what our kids are dealing with at school, it's enormous. And it's new, it's novel, that we are not accustomed to dealing with that level of volatility on a persistent basis. Then you add in the uncertainty that goes with that. Very, very high levels of uncertainty, which brings change. And humans, as a rule, hate change. We prefer order. So when change starts to inject itself in our life, it takes us back to a primal mindset. It takes us back to a scarcity mindset, a fear-based mindset. Uncertainty pulls out our most primal instincts, particularly if we're untrained in dealing with change. And so, volatility, uncertainty, and then complexity. Think about your business right now. How complex has it become in the last year? What was once simple is very complex. and there's multiple steps in it, and it's hard to understand. It's ill structured. It's ill formed. It takes more than one person to figure it out. So the social problems, the community problems, the things that in your business that were once identifiable and solvable in a linear fashion, those days are gone. They're gone. We now live in an era of the wicked problem. We now live in an era of complexity. And, how we as leaders frame and tame complexity is going to be everything in terms of how relevant we are. And then finally, ambiguous. The lack of clarity is unprecedented. Think about it. Think about it. If you turn the 24-hour news cycle on, I don't care what channel it is, how do you know what you're actually getting? I mean, seriously, how do you know what's being filtered and given to you? Like, it has become so ambiguous. There is such an absence of clarity that it is truly rivaling the fog of war, as Clausewitz said. There is just complete ambiguity. And the problem with this is that people follow leaders who are clear. We don't follow, as a rule, anyone who is ambiguous. And so if we're going to assert ourselves and be relevant in the 21st century, we got to find a way to get clear in this ambiguity. So those are the realities that we're facing right now in the arena. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the human terrain. Okay. The human terrain is a serious, serious challenge as well. If you guys are hearing that buzzing sound, yeah, that's my middle son who just burned his chicken in the kitchen. So all this talk about them being adults, not quite yet, not quite yet, but we're getting there. So the second piece of this, though, is the human terrain. Now, we think about the environment. Now let's think about, what does the human terrain look like that your kids, my kids, are inheriting? I call it triple D. Triple D: distracted, disengaged, and distrustful. Those are the 3 Ds that we've got to be mindful of as we navigate the world and as our children navigate the world. Okay. Let me talk about each one of them a little bit. Distracted. The levels of distraction in this country right now and in this world are off the chain. And again, we've become accustomed to it. So it's like an invisible truth. We know it. It kind of ticks us off, but we don't really process it consciously, and we need to. Let me give you a few examples. Have you noticed, like, the next time you go in public, notice what people do with their mobile devices? Those, these things right here, these dopamine dispensers. Like, notice how people notice how you do. Like, if you're standing, we were loading out from the beach today. We were at the elevators. It was my 3 sons, Monty, and me, and we're waiting for the elevator, right? We're just sitting there waiting for the elevator to take us back up to the room. What do you think we did while we were waiting for the elevator? Right here, right? The left hemisphere of the brain took over. It demanded myopic focus. It demanded information. And so the left, I went right. We're all on our phones, standing next to each other. And my oldest son leaves in 3 hours. What are we doing? What are we doing? But the fact of the matter is, the average attention span, according to Gallup right now, is 8 seconds. 8 seconds before the other party is either looking at their phone under the table or thinking about something else, right? And so when you get in front of people, when your kids get in front of people and they're trying to do their job, or they're trying to go for an interview, or a veteran is going in for an interview, you have 8 seconds to gain the attention of the other party and move them into your sphere, or they're gone, right? Adam Ghazali, in his book, The Distracted Mind, I think he says it best. We are ancient brains struggling through a modern world. You see, our brain is the same brain that it was 250,000 years ago. It was already distracted. It always has been. Our brain is slightly above a primate in terms of cognitive focus and attention. Now, we have very complex frontal lobes that allow us to do goal setting, But when it comes to focus and putting our energy on something, we already suck. You add this thing to it, and it's a whole different animal. And so, and 24-hour news cycle. So there's a whole host of things that are pulling our attention. It's called goal interruption, right? And goal interruption is at epic levels today. So distracted, we're highly distracted. Disengaged, that means lacking purpose. 85% of the American workforce claims to be disengaged. 85%. That's pre-pandemic, by the way. Right? So think about disengagement. Think about absence of purpose for our kids and what they've got to deal with when they go into the workforce or when they go into their arena. And finally, distrust. This is the one that gives me the most concern as a former Green Beret, because social capital is how we navigate the world. Relationships are indeed currency. 2/3 of Americans now say they don't trust their neighbor. That's up from 1/3 in 1972. And it's still climbing, right? And this isn't, now this is don't trust their neighbor, right? Forget about in groups and out groups at work, in groups and out groups in their community, in their schools. You know, we have an epic erosion of trust in this country. So those are, you know, some of the baseline things. And then finally, I talked about looking at ourselves. Stephen Pressfield, in his book, The War of Art, which I think everybody should read if you haven't read it. It's one of the best self-help books out there. He talks about this internal force that we're all dealing with as well, and he calls it resistance with a capital R. And a resistance is basically self-sabotage. It's so if Lynette has this wonderful positive energy in her to achieve her goals that drives her onward, what Pressfield says is there's an equal negative energy in us as well that will show up and try to put itself squarely between us and those goals that we're trying to achieve. So whether it's the treadmill in the corner gathering dust, whether it's the, you know, diet that simply doesn't get executed after, you know, January 5th, or whether it is that business that you wanted to start, but at some point you tell yourself, you have no business doing this, man. You don't have the experience for this. Let somebody else do this. Like that imposter syndrome. Resistance is a very real thing. That self-sabotage that takes our own knees out. In fact, it's probably the most diabolical enemy we face is our own resistance to take ourselves out of the game when the environment of VUCA and the human terrain conspire and press upon us. We pull back. And you don't have to look far today to see that. You don't have to look far to see it in yourself. You don't have to look far to see it in others. And all of those things together, you guys, is what I call the churn. It's all of that volatility and tension that stands between us and our goals. It's external and it's internal. And it's a very real thing, right? We've always got this churn that's just, it's all around us, and it's keeping us from making the levels of connection that we need to make to move through the world and get things done. So I took some time to lay that out for you because look, we are facing unprecedented levels of tension and friction between us and our goals. And we really need to be mindful of that, particularly when you think about COVID and what's happened with the persistent fear, the uncertainty, and the isolation that have come along with it. I think over the next year or 2 years, we're going to see a lot of challenge in how people come back to work. And yes, Ron, the lazy brain, absolutely. It is, it's something that we've got to contend with as we come back into the sunlight and people come back to work and we try to get our footing again in this world. I don't think it's going to be as easy as people think. I don't think it's going to be a ticker tape parade. I'm already seeing this with people trying to return to work, with sales teams trying to get going again, with veterans trying to transition. It's going to be tough. And so taking consideration of our operational environment is really, really important. The rule that I kind of say to leaders when I train at Rooftop Leadership and when I teach and train with veterans is this, and it comes from a friend of mine named Bo Eason, and it's this: I don't believe anybody else is coming. I think if we're waiting for, the cavalry to come riding over the hill and save the day, they ain't coming. Like, it's not going to happen. There is nobody else coming. I don't think there's anybody that's going to swoop in and rescue us. and I found in combat that is one of the, once you arrive at that and once you recognize that, you kind of get this little crooked grin on your face and you're like, okay, well, then it's just us then. Fine, let's go. And you settle into it. You settle into it and you actually get down to the business of leading. But Ron's point about that lazy brain, like we do have a tendency to kind of look over our shoulder and go, well, maybe somebody else is, no, they're not coming. I really believe that. I believe that where we are now is where we are, and we're going to have to lead ourselves through it. And I think our kids are going to have to lead ourselves through it. And so what does it mean to raise up leaders in these uncertain times? And that's what I'm going to talk about for the rest of the time we have. I'm going to pause there to see if anyone has any questions or comments, and then we'll pivot. Yeah, Ron.
Yeah, I have one question. Dr. Stephanie, whatever her name is, talks about the creative subconscious that wants to keep things status quo. It doesn't want to change. So for example, I'm going to say this, and I don't want to. So domestic violence, the idea of changing is so hard that our brain tries to normalize, bring us back to some kind of thing. Is this kind of what you're talking about when you talk about this, the VUCA and the ambiguousness and changing to we're settled into COVID now coming out of COVID is new. So
yeah, I think what the point that I would make on this, Ron, is for our purposes is to recognize that the operational environment has indeed changed, first of all. And it's changed dramatically, but it's changed in such a way over a year plus now, that it's almost been to the point that like we've adjusted to it and we've made adjustments. And so now we're not as mindful of the impacts of VUCA in our environment, the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity of the distraction, the disengagement, and the distrust, and the resistance that we've developed for ourselves. And so when you put all that together, and oh, by the way, unprecedented isolation. Like I hear people saying to me, I could work remote forever. I'm good. I don't need anybody. And I'm like, careful, be very careful there. Like that's not what we're wired to do. I get it. I understand the point, but we're not wired to be removed from each other. We sit on top of the food chain not because we have fur, fangs, or claws, but because of our ability to team and form teams with other people. Like that's how we've survived and thrived for all these years. So when we go the other way and we start self-isolating and thinking that we're good, according to Ivan Terrell in his book, The Human Givens, that's when we actually can potentially start to approach madness, because there are no other humans for us to even regulate our behavior with, right? So there's an impact of isolation. There is an impact of VUCA. There's an impact of that triple D. If all of those things, we got to recognize that, Ron. That's the first point that I would make. And then it's at two levels. How has that affected me as a person? Like, where am I right now in the game? And I would challenge all of you to use today and the next couple of days as we go into the weekend to reassess, where am I in the fight? Where am I in the arena right now? Right? As I look at VUCA in my arena, how has it affected me? As I look at the distraction, disengagement, and distrust in my arena, how has it affected me? And I'm going to talk specifically to this. And then finally, where is self-sabotage kicking my butt right now? Where have I pulled back? Where am I holding back? Where have I punted when I should have run? And then look at the people you serve and ask those exact same questions. With my wife and kids, where has VUCA affected them? Where has distraction, disengagement, distrust affected them? Where is resistance affecting them? Because if I can start to get clarity on those factors with the people in my arena who I serve, now I'm actually in a position to show up as a leader. Now I'm in a position to actually be relevant to their dreams and relatable to their pain. but to me, it's a process. Like, it can't be casual. I got to dig into that a little bit. That's why I offered you that framework to kind of look at your arena where you live, work, and play, some frameworks to think about the environment itself, the human terrain, and then yourself. Give it a shot. And I think if nothing else, you'll have a bit more self-awareness of where you are, kind of post-COVID, and then where your folks are. But what I would like to do is I'd like to give you, depending on time, but I'm going to cover 10 things that I share with my boys about empowered leadership, that I believe that based on the conditions I just gave you in this very weird environment that we're in, that these 10 things could help you. And I'm gonna be pretty, common sense about it. Happy to chat about any of them that you all want. But just again, what I would ask you to consider is that we are in some weird times. We are in some weird times. Is anybody else seeing it besides me? Like, when you go outside, do you notice it's just kind of odd? Like, it's like we want to go back to normal or whatever that is, but like, it's just weird. There's this tepid tension between people at a level that is novel. We're not used to it, and we're trying to figure out. We're almost like we're walking out of a storm cellar, and we're kind of blinking in the sunlight, and other people are walking out blinking in the sunlight, and we're trying to figure out how do we even go about doing what we used to do that was easy to do? How do we reconnect with each other? How do we reemerge? And there's also stuff from our past that has hitched its wagon to us that wasn't there before. Let me give you one quick example. Yeah, perfect storm. Absolutely. Janet says so much fear and suspicion of each other. Well, think about it for a second. Who was the threat when COVID first hit? That person that just sneezed over there. Right? I mean, everyone was a threat. We were conditioned to view other human beings as a threat. I remember the first time I ordered a pizza in COVID, and this guy shows up with the pizza and he's got a mask on. And I go to the door and I've got a mask on. And he lays the pizza down. And I'm standing back like, do I draw down on this guy? Is this like a hostage exchange? How do we do this? And then now we know exactly how to do it. He sits it down. I pay him remote. We don't need to talk to each other, right? Folks, that's 250,000 years of hardwiring that's been undone in a year, right? And so if we think there's not going to be secondary and tertiary effects of that, we're deluded. We're deluded. Like, we're not showing up as leaders. We are just kind of going along in that trance-like state with everybody else. So, Green Berets, our focus is to look at human terrain. Our focus is to look at social realities and call them out even when it's uncomfortable. So I'm calling it out. Like, we're in it for a while. We're going to be in some weirdness. So how do we lead our nation through, this weirdness? And I think Sarah's right. We have to be proactive, 100%. Lynette talks about the neighbor lady that came over to give a dollhouse. It was an odd interchange. It was just strange. It just didn't feel right. Like, something just felt off. So your instincts are right. So what I'm going to try to do is offer some stuff that might add some conscious awareness and conscious skill to those instincts, your spidey senses that are already going in the right direction. So the first thing I think we have to do in these crazy times is we have to lower the emotional temperature in every room we go into, right? So Professor James Clausen, he says that leadership is the management of energy, yours and those around you. And I love that. I think that's a great definition of leadership, is managing energy. First your own, and then the energy of others. Because as humans, according to Einstein, we're mostly energy, right? So wouldn't it just stand to reason that leadership is managing energy? What I think about in managing energy, I remember one time we were going to do a mission, and we were taking Afghan tribal folks on the mission. They were going to actually be the main effort. And, we were preparing all our stuff. We were getting our weapons ready, and we were getting our equipment ready, and the sun's setting and it's starting to get close to dark. And I hear this music over in the side of the village. And I look over and there's like 40 young Afghan men in this beautifully colored garb, and their headdresses on, and there's drums going, and they're bouncing up and down. And I'm like, what in the Sam hell is this? And they're really and they're working themselves up and they're working themselves up. And it turns out, and I would see many more of these, as I'm sure other people who've been in Afghanistan would see, it was called the Atan. It's a war dance. And it's a dance that young Afghan males or Afghan males do before they go into combat. And it's designed to put yourself in a trance-like state so that you can physiologically do what is required to do in battle. It's the same thing that we're over there playing Metallica music, right? Getting everybody amped up. It's the same thing that athletes do before they take the field. The New Zealand all black, when they do the dance that they do against the other team. Like, humans have been doing this for years and thousands of years. We manage our energy to put ourselves into a certain state so that we can perform certain things, right? Humans go in and out of trances all the time. When someone tells a story at a TED Talk and you're in the audience and you're watching the audience, it's a great storyteller. The audience is like this. Jaws down, right? Eyes are open. And what's happening? They're going through narrative transportation. They're literally in the story. They are experiencing the story in the lived body. They're in a trance, right? If you see someone who has like completely lost their temper over the election, right? And you look at what physicality are they displaying? You ever heard the saying "seeing red"? Right? They've dropped into a physiological trance of anger, right? And it's just an emotion. It's their body calling for a response to the environment. That's a trance. The problem is when we go into these trance-like states that are happening all over the place right now, that are fear-based and anger-based. When you're in that highly aroused state of fight, flight, or freeze, where the sympathetic nervous system is fully engaged, it's Charles Griffin, Ivan Terrell, they say anger makes us temporarily stupid. Fear makes us temporarily stupid. Our perspective for human connection, our broader perspective of things, it shrinks down to the size of a soda straw. Think about it. Think about when you get super angry or super afraid. What's your perspective? What's your ability to connect with other humans? Like, you care about? No, you're completely in survival mode. It's either fight, run, or freeze, right? And that's what your body and everything in your body, the energy is moving to physiologically perform that task. Any combat veteran will tell you that in combat, the bullets get quiet. The bullets get quiet because I don't need to hear the bullets anymore. I'm facing gunfire. I need all my acuity in my vision, right? And in my sense of touch. I don't need to hear the bullets anymore, so I don't. Well, it's the same thing when we get angry with another human to the point of the trance-like state. No one's listening to anybody. You physiologically can't hear a damn word they're saying. They're literally speaking past each other. They're posturing for something much deeper, much more insidious, right? So no one's listening. So people are in these trance-like states. And you know what I'm talking about. I mean, turn the news on, for God's sakes, for 30 seconds. Look at Facebook, look at Instagram. You don't have to look far to see people caught up in this trance-like state of fear and or anger. And that emotional temperature is a problem, right? So if I go into a village in Afghanistan and the emotional temperature is through the roof, the first thing do you think I'm going to sit down and start talking about democracy? Like, is that a good idea? Right? If your child is just wailing, upset, screaming, crying, well, does it help to go, well, that'll teach you, right? There's no way. Like, all you do is you send them high order, right? You just send them deeper into that trance. So as leaders, we want to manage the emotional temperature. We want to bring the emotional temperature in the room down. And I'm telling you, I've been doing this for a long time and I teach it now. That's a skill. Like, you can do that. You don't need a title. You don't need permission. You can manage emotional temperature in a room. And it actually starts by how you manage your own state. It actually starts by how you manage your own emotional temperature. Because if you go into a sympathetic state, if you go into the red of fight, flight, or freeze, if you get caught up in the emotional churn, then because we're social creatures, those mirror neurons kick on and they'll mirror that. And it just goes up and up and up. But if we can regulate our own state, right, and drop into that parasympathetic calm and connect state, feel our feet on the floor, inhale through our nose, expand our belly on the inhale, and just squeeze belly to spine on the exhale for 3 to 5 breaths, and just be present in the room. We can get ourselves into the right state, and then we can start to bring the emotional temperature in the room down. And it's a very doable thing, but it must be deliberate. It must be a decision that we make, right? And it's probably one of the greatest gifts I think we can give as leaders, is to help manage emotional temperature in the room and not get caught up and not go down that road. If you want some other examples of emotional temperature, anytime you see contempt in the room, you don't have to look far. You can smell contempt a mile away. Humans, we're very attuned primally. Contempt is very easy to see, smell. You can smell contempt, right? So when contempt starts to permeate a room, can we manage that temperature? Can we bring that temperature down? Moral superiority is another one, right? And it's another one that's very pervasive these days. This is really important stuff, because if we can manage our own state and the state of others, here's what happens. And this is what we learned as Green Berets. We had to relearn it, but here's the return on investment of it. You ready? The other party will eventually get ready to listen to what you have to say. That's the beauty of managing the emotional temperature in a room, is if you can if you can manage your own emotional temperature and you can manage the emotional temperature of the other party, at some point they do get ready to hear what you have to say. And they become ready to listen, right? And now we can actually move in a direction that has synchronicity to it. But if the emotional temperature is not managed, they can't hear anything I'm saying anyway. They physiologically cannot hear me. And all I'm doing is just contributing to the churn. So that's the first one I say is managing that emotional temperature. It is so important. And the other things I'm going to say will kind of speak to that. The second thing that I believe leaders today can do to help move our country in a direction that we need to go is to promote and stand for bridging trust. Bridging trust. I love Sarah's title of building bridges, because it's really what we need to do today. Because we are primal creatures, we are tribal creatures. We're still very traditional in our genetic makeup. It's very easy for us to split into in groups and out groups and demonstrate primal behavior. And so as leaders, if we can promote bridging trust, that's a very, very powerful contribution. Where I saw that when the first time I became familiar with bridging trust and the other type of trust, which I use is bonding trust. The first time I became aware of that was in Afghanistan when we were working with tribes. And I had several social scientists point out to me that trust, because I was saying there was no trust in this village. Well, there was trust in the village. There was total trust, but it was the ancient kind of trust. It's the kind of trust that one has for one's brother and one's father and one's mother and one's cousin and maybe one's neighbor. And that's about it, because the trust is necessary to protect my resources and acquire more. It's necessary to survive. And it's the bond that I have with my kin, my clan, the people closest to me for survival. It's the same bond that a pack of wolves has, right? It's ancient, it's deep, but it's not very wide. The circle is not very wide. And when I start to bump up against the edge of that circle, guess what? Those uncles and aunts and friends, I don't trust them. I don't trust them at all. In fact, they are the enemy. They are opposing my ability to get to resources, right? And that's called bonding trust. And that's where in groups and out groups come from. And it's 250,000 years old or older, maybe 1,000,000 years old. Like, we have been forming in groups and out groups for literally tens of thousands of years. And so we bond and we trust naturally those in our in-group. And we've been doing this for thousands of years, and we do it naturally. Like, have you ever been to a holiday party, Lynette? And, you know, there's people there, like they don't necessarily, like it's an office thing, and everybody just goes to their corners. Like everybody just kind of goes to their different business team that they're in. And then they sit over there and they talk about those people, and they talk about, yeah, I can't believe she wore that. And it's like, but we form these tribal in groups we do it all the time, and we almost don't think about it. But let me ask you, and I want to get some feedback here. Look around the country today, and how would you assess in-group, out-group behavior in Canada and the United States? Anyone want to weigh
Definitely
in?
very little out group.
Yeah, I mean, it's everyone's kind of like gone to their corners, and they, you know, because what happens, and this is really important, as humans, when we get afraid, we go back to our in-groups. When we lose trust and confidence in rule of law or mechanical processes or structures, we revert back to our traditional comfort zone, which is the person that's at my shoulder, the person who's my kin, the person who's right next to me, because I'm afraid or I'm angry. And so that's who I'm gonna connect with in times of duress. And you can look historically and you'll see that. You'll see where we all do that. We revert back to, when things get real, we get tribal, we get primal, we get, and so we pull back, everybody does. And all of a sudden you have this in-group, out-group dynamic that is very pronounced. Now, here's where the problem comes in with that, is that if you look at a free society, they are built on, you know, bonding trust is in all of us, but then there's another level of trust, which is bridging trust. And Robert Putnam talks about this in his book, Bowling Alone, and the Upswing. And basically what Putnam says is that bridging trust, or bridging social capital, as he says it, is an advanced form of trust, where, like in bonding trust, the only people I can trust is my group, right? So the group is at the center of everything. My in-group, the in-group is the dominant factor in society. Well, in bridging trust, that's not true. In bridging trust, I can trust beyond my in-group. The emphasis is actually on the individual. So you have democracy and rule of law in place to keep these groups at bay, so that individuals can assert themselves. Individuals can bridge beyond their clan or their tribe or their family or their ethnicity or their religion, and they can form whatever relationships they want. They can bridge beyond that. And you know, Sarah says, I always think of it like finding the willing people. Yeah, exactly. But it could be, for example, you could create a bridging trust network around the air conditioner business. Like you're in the air conditioner business, and you want to have like-minded air conditioner business owners in 5 different states, and every one of you is a different color, different religion. It doesn't matter, because you have a functional interest in air conditioning. If you tried to do that in southern Afghanistan, you would have a tribal feud on your hands, because you can't do that. Your obligations are to your group, your kin, your clan. You're bound to that. It's honor. And you cannot go beyond that regardless. So you see what I mean? And that's why a lot of times you see these in-group, out-group feuds that just tear countries apart. They tear organizations apart, because it's all based on honor and shame and advancement of one group over another. And bridging trust is a relatively new form of trust. It's not natural in most human situations. Like most humans don't do it under normal conditions. We've built that over time, and it takes leadership to maintain it and preserve it. If leaders pull back from bridging trust, in other words, bridging beyond in groups and really connecting when it's uncomfortable, then it falls apart. So let me ask you all, as you look around, how many leaders these days do you see promoting bridging trust? How many leaders do you see bridging beyond whatever group they're in, regardless? And yeah, so I'm just throwing that out there. Like, Alexander de Tocqueville talked about this early in our country's formation. He said, "What strikes me about America is she has individualism rightly understood." It was this sense of individuality, but yet with a kind of a tie to our past, a communal tie to our past that was very unique. Now, at the same time, we also had slavery and women had not voted yet. So I'm by no means asserting that we don't have a ton of challenges in this country that we need to address and fix and make better and make more inclusive, because we do. But I firmly believe that it needs to come from a position of bridging trust, not bonding trust. And as leaders, if we can just promote bridging, just look for opportunities to bridge beyond our in-group, encourage our children to bridge beyond their in-group, then I think we're going to be in a better place. From a social capital perspective, if we don't get back to bridging, I don't know how we make it. Go ahead, Sarah.
I love what you're saying. There's so much. I have a feeling that there are many people thinking and feeling the same way as I do about this whole subject. I love what you said earlier about a leader we want to follow clarity. And that's what a lot of us don't have. We don't have the dialogue. We can't articulate what we are feeling and thinking in all this. When there's so many narratives that are not feeling right, like, no, yes, there's part of that I think is right on, but this is, I don't know, there's something not right about this. And so what I feel like you're bringing today is you're really articulating what leadership looks like. And I love that. To me, that hits the bullseye of what I have been feeling and thinking is really being able to build that bridge of trust. And I do not see many people doing that. And so I think that's, again, why I'm really appreciating your message today. And then some others that are kind of talking along similar lines. It's almost like this invitation that we can start having these very real conversations to help us all articulate what we're trying to say, how we're trying to build trust, what we're going after that we don't have quite the clarity yet. And so I really appreciate this conversation, because to me, it does clarify what we're trying to get to, those that are wanting to be proactive. So
100%.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, you're welcome, Sarah. And that's our goal at Rooftop, is to we're not trying to advance policy or really any ideology. What we're trying to do is equip responsible servant leaders to utilize purpose-based human connection in whatever arena they're leading in. And so whether that's a nonprofit, whether it's a small business owner, whatever, there is an approach and a grammar and a language that we can actually use to underpin what it is that we're trying to build. And honestly, I think if we can, as a society, start to move toward bridging trust, and as a general movement, agree that that is the level of social capital that we want. And the thing I would ask all of you to look for these days, the thing that should make your spidey senses go off is any evidence of in-group, out-group behavior. So if you look at an arena and you see in-groups and out-groups going at each other with contempt and or moral superiority, there you go, right there. That is bonding trust. And the question then becomes, how do we bridge that? Can we bridge that? Can we, over time, create a unifying vision that would bring those in-groups together? Which takes me to point number 3. We've got to regain our national narrative. We absolutely must regain our national narrative. The other day, I was interviewing a guy named John, who is a wonderful dispute resolution expert from Canada. He lives in the UK now. The founder of the Conciliators Guild. And I love what he does, because he doesn't come from a fixed mindset. And he really understands the human givens. He understands human nature, and he brings that into dispute resolution. And we've become friends, John. And I asked him, I said, what do you think, what worries you the most about the United States right now? And he said, do you mind if I tell you? I said, no, I want you to tell me. He said, you've lost your national narrative. You're losing the myth that binds you, and collapse will not be far behind. And I agree with him, because here's why. Not that I think the collapse is like imminent, but it is a possibility in any collective or any organization that does not have a binding narrative. Like, I have worked in countries, for example, Afghanistan. There are very few narratives in that country that unify the people of that country. Like, there's not a deep level of patriotism. There's not a deep level of collective service. It's pretty much every tribe for themselves, every clan for themselves. There's even a saying in Afghanistan that I think is a narrative, and an unfortunate one, and it's this: me against my brother and me against my cousin, my brother and me against the world. In other words, the only time we unify is when outsiders come at us. There's, other than that, we're at each other. And that's their narrative. That's a bad narrative. Like, to me, that's not a narrative I want. Imagine that narrative in the United States. But are we that far off? What is our myth that binds us as a nation? And is it prominent? Is it universal? Is it regarded? Is it because I would submit that it's not. I would say that most of our narratives that did bind us, or that were prominent, have fallen out of favor, or have fallen into question. And there's a whole host of issues around that. But what I'm simply stating, as someone who looks at civil society, if we don't get our stories back, if we don't get a story that binds us as a nation, we're in trouble. If your business doesn't have a story, a narrative that binds it, you're in trouble. If your community, your school, your family doesn't have a narrative that binds it, you're in trouble. Right? Because we are story animals. We have been telling stories for 70,000 years, right? Story. That's why I love the title of Sarah's podcast, The Power of a Story. Let me share a little bit of neuroscience with you on that. The brain, according to Dr. Kendall Haven, has this thing that he calls a make sense mandate. The brain has a mandate to make sense of the world. Do you know how the brain does it? It's a metaphorical pattern matching organ. In other words, it tells itself a story to make sense of the world every time. Doesn't matter if it's your client, doesn't matter if it's your child, doesn't matter if it's you. When you see new information, you're telling yourself a story, and it's usually off old patterns. We need new patterns, new stories that give us a sense of what's possible in the world. That's why story is so powerful. It allows the other party to transport narratively with you and come with you and locate themselves in your story. It binds us. If I tell a story about my father's battle with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, it doesn't matter where I go. People in the audience, one person is thinking about her sister's run with cancer. Another person is thinking about how he lost his mom to cancer. Another woman is thinking, damn, I hope I don't get cancer. But all of this autobiographical listening is happening, and we're all transported into one narrative. And that's the power of a story. And it is absolutely essential for a country, a nation, a community to stand for the long term, to have a narrative that binds it. And right now we don't, so my recommendation, stories help us bridge gaps for all of my veterans and first responders. That's why we founded the nonprofit Hero's Journey. If you want to reintegrate into society, if you want to really bridge the gaps between veteran and civilian, you got to be a storyteller. And I think all of us, I would challenge all of you to become master storytellers. Like, it is not out of vogue. It has never been more relevant. It is how the other party makes sense of the world, and they're going to tell themselves a story one way or the other. And the only way they're going to get it wrong, and they're going to be pissed off that they had to tell themselves a story to make sense of your 70 pages of PowerPoint. Right? Or in the absence of a national story, a national narrative, each in-group will form their own narrative. Not good. Not good. It's impossible to bridge with multiple narratives. You got to at least have one narrative that binds. And so my hope is that we create more and more storytellers. We need storytellers. It's the only way to combat these things. and helping our children become storytellers, helping our children learn the value of story, helping our veterans and our first responders, our law enforcement become storytellers so that they can heal the brain, heal the heart, and connect across big divides. I'm so excited that Sarah has this podcast because she's unleashing storytellers, and that's what we need. And I study it nonstop, you guys. I study human connection. I'm like, my wife is so anxious for me to get a hobby because all I do is study human connection. Like, I obsess over it. And I'm telling you, if you continue to train as a storyteller, you're going to own every room you walk into, every room, and you're going to own it the right way. You're going to be relevant to people's dreams, and you're going to be relatable to their pain. That's what storytellers do. So we got to regain our national narrative through storytelling. That's number 3. Number 4, this is a really important one. I believe as leaders, we have to reconnect to our human nature. You know, we learned in Afghanistan in 2010 that we had become very arrogant. We had thought that we could go into those villages and promote democracy and mobile justice and, free market, and that they would just, waltz right into our way of life and get on board. And you know what? That couldn't be further from the truth, because there was a level to their civil society that was around honor and status and family and kin and revenge, hospitality, that we did not understand, that we had just taken for granted. We thought, because we were such an advanced modern society, that that's what they would want. And that's not true at all. The fact of the matter is, those local Afghans had a much better sense of their nature than we did. They knew exactly who they were. They knew exactly who their ancestors were and where they came from. They knew the power of story. They knew how to listen. They knew what honor looked like. We were the ones with the hubris. We were the ones disconnected from our own nature. And I believe that's what's happening to our country right now. We don't understand at a fundamental level that even though we're modern, we are meaning-seeking, emotional, social story animals who struggle. That is who we are. We are well-dressed Neanderthals, right? And we navigate this world assigning meaning to things. We must have purpose or we die. We are emotional creatures. We make decisions off emotion, not logic. As a general rule, emotion drives our behaviors. We are storytellers first and foremost, and we always have been. We are wired to be social with one another. Molecules like oxytocin and dopamine, they drive us to connect. And then finally, struggle. We are creatures of struggle, you guys. It's Daniel Coyle says it in Culture Code. Struggle is a biological necessity. Like we go through struggle. We are going to struggle. As leaders, we should talk about struggle. We should repurpose struggle in the service of others. In my talk, TED Talk, The Generosity of Scars, I talk about how with my own bout with suicide, that one of the first times I saw the power of story and struggle, its benefits, was talking to a fellow Green Beret about my bout with suicide when I knew he was close to taking his own life. And I saw in that moment right there that embarrassing scar from my past had such value to him. It made me relatable to him. He saw in that moment that he wasn't alone. And that's what we're going through as humans. Struggle binds us. People locate you as a leader. Your child locates you as a leader the moment she knows you have struggled. But what do? We cover it up. Nothing to see here. Here's 5 easy tips to be great like me, right? I mean, it's unwatchable. We can't watch it anymore, right? It's not attractive. It doesn't draw us in. What draws us in are leaders who have been scuffed up, leaders who have been through things and dealt with struggle. So, I tell you all that because that's all part of our human nature. It's down below the waterline. We've got to recognize that we are meaning-seeking, emotional, social story animals who struggle. In other words, we're a mess, right? Humans are a mess, and that's who we are. We are ancient brains in a high-tech world. the more we can actually learn about, for example, when we get afraid or we get angry, we go into a trance-like state. Sympathetic nervous system kicks in, emotional temperature goes up. We physiologically don't listen to each other. The aperture for perspective goes to a soda straw. We're in a trance. Okay, cool. What do I do about that? Well, I can use diaphragmatic breathing. I can feel my feet on the floor. I can notice 3 new things in the room, and I can drop back into a parasympathetic state. I can regulate my own state. Now I can lead. You see what I mean? Like, the more we train on understanding our own nature and connect to it, the more we can keep our primal nature from acting on us in a negative way. Now that, look, all I can tell you is that takes work. Like, I can't, there's no way, Sarah, I can cover this one in, 15 minutes left, but I do hope that I've piqued your interest, because you wouldn't be on here if you weren't focused on leading at a community level. And if you want to be super relevant in the toughest of times, get reconnected to your nature. And I can help with that. Like, Sarah and I can talk offline in some ways. I've got a lot of free stuff that I can make available to you, but the more you can study that, and no one does it. Nobody does it. Everybody is so transactional, so left brain, so material, that what's actually happening is they're actually adding to the churn as leaders, because they're trying to lead top down and prescripted, and it just sends the other party high order, man. Right? The leaders who can get below the waterline of that iceberg and see where people really live and what's going on, they're the ones that are gonna hold the room. So empathy, reciprocity, relationships, storytelling, active listening. You know what I'm talking about. It's the stuff your grandparents did, but it's about getting back to a skill of that, not just instinct. Yeah, Ron.
So in and among all of this, almost always I have a desired outcome, and how I'm practicing and learning and hearing about having outcome neutrality, that I'm okay either way. How does that fit into this?
That's a great question. That's probably one of the best questions I've heard in a long time. Here's how I teach that as a negotiator and in human engagement, right? First of all, we're all goal-oriented creatures. We all have goals, because goals are a reflection of meaning. Like, we assign meaning to what we do in life. And so goals are a reflection of that. So it's natural to have goals, and that's cool. But we also need to remember, again, going back to that MESS acronym, we are social. And so, one of the best ways that we can get our goals met is through social capital. It's through relationships are indeed currency. So, for example, if I'm going into a village in Afghanistan, the relationship that I have with that elder is way more important than the immediate transaction that I'm trying to get for him to do X, Y, and Z. Right? For me, the long game is the relationship. Right? And then if I can establish that social capital, that tangible linkage between he and I in the form of a relationship, it'll spin off more transactions than I can count. So from a goal perspective, I personally want to meet their goal first. In fact, when I sit down in an engagement, whether it's real estate, I do a lot of commercial real estate and things like that, I'll say, you know what? I'm going to have to insist here that I don't want to even talk about my goals until I'm crystal clear on what your goals are, and we've got a path to meet them. Would that be okay? And they're usually like, but what that doesn't cost me anything. That doesn't cost me anything at all. And it puts me in a position where a relationship can, we can start a connection and ultimately, hopefully, get towards some level of reciprocity. Because I've just found that if I can meet the other party where they are, get clear on their pain and get clear on their goals, and demonstrate that I actually care about meeting them, there's a real good chance they're going to meet mine. And I've tested that in some of the most dangerous places on earth. And I firmly believe it. And I firmly believe that it's met with positive response here at home. Does that help?
I mean, because sometimes, the more intensely I want something, it seems like the less likely I'm going to get that thing. I have a saying that if I want it bad, I get it bad. And the worse I want it, the worse I get it, you know?
Yeah, you're actually setting me up perfectly for number 5. And it's the one that I actually, it's my number 1 principle in the book I wrote, Game Changers, about the Afghan war, what we learned working in these villages. And it's this: meet them where they are, not where you want them to be. That's number 5. I think that's what we need to teach our kids. I think that's what we need to do in this country. I don't care what the situation is, meet them where they are, not where you want them to be. And by meeting them where they are, let me be very explicit, and then I'll go to Janet. Is I want to be an empathetic witness. Like, I want to drop in and really get a visceral sense of what they value and the pain that they're experiencing in that goal. Right. And once I have a sense of that, and I can demonstrate that I do, then I've at least met them where they are. I've dropped into that world that they live in. It's pure discovery, pure, unabashed, unapologetic discovery. And it takes a little more energy, but boy, does it take you down a different path. Janet?
I find that when you're not attached to the outcome, that's when things change. And I tell my clients that their success is my success. Because when you see somebody change in front of you, and them, like I just finished with a client, and he says, "This is not what I was after when we started." And, just to see that a belief come to them that they didn't even realize was there, that's reward.
You're so right. The other day, I did a discovery call with a client, a big client, a Fortune 500 client, for connection training. And we had a 30-minute discovery call. I asked thoughtful, open-ended questions that let them tell me stories about their pain and their goals for 26 minutes. 26 minutes, right? We timed it. At 26, and my team's freaking. They're like, "What are you doing?" At the 26 minute, I said, do you think it would be okay? I recited back to them what I'd heard. Would it be all right if I share with you how I think we can play our position for you? She goes, "You can, but we're good. We're ready to move." I hadn't even told her what we were going to do. Right. But the point is, like, people choose the storyteller. They choose you way before they choose what it is that you're offering. Now, I get it. I know that we got to go into that. But my point is, there is a level of connection, rapport, reciprocity, relatability, and relevance that is achieved way before an offer is made or a transaction or a table is slapped. And it's what you're talking about, Janet. It's that ability to meet people where they are, establish, be that empathetic witness. I think I'm going to land on this one. I had a goal for 10, but we've gone deeper than I thought, and I'm happy about that. Let me just end it here, Sarah. It's that if you all think about, like, okay, what does that mean? Like, we've talked about, let me find the 10 here. Yeah, so we've talked about lowering emotional temperature, bridging trust, regaining national narrative, reconnecting to our nature, and meeting people where they are. So if there's a way to manifest that in your body, I would say it's Dr. Benjamin Hardy's term, empathetic witness. It really does come down to how we show up to bear witness to the other party's dreams and goals, and the pain associated with achieving that. And we approach it with pure discovery, pure curiosity, so that we can get clear on that we're relatable to their pain and we're relevant to their goals. And I use what Warren Berger calls questionology to do that. His book, The Book of Beautiful Questions, I cannot recommend high enough. But it's basically this: it's thoughtful, open-ended questions that let the other party tell me a story. I don't judge what they say. I don't criticize what they say. I don't even offer my position until I'm crystal clear on their pain and their goals. And at that point, when I demonstrate that, they are typically ready to listen to what I have to say. And they've probably made a choice already in regards to me and to my presence there. And that's what I love about being an empathetic witness. And you know what? If they don't, I've got a relationship underway here, a connection, and at a minimum, I guarantee you I've lowered the emotional temperature in that room. And so I've done my job. And if imagine a country, imagine a community, if we all just approached our day that way, if we engaged our children that way, if we talked politics that way, that's what I think we need. And we learned that the hard way in Afghanistan. We forgot that, and I think we're forgetting that in this country right now. And so, that's my take on it. I hope this served in some small way. I feel like I covered a lot of ground, but I'm proud of you all for being here and taking the time to do this. I hope that served a little bit. We're at rooftopleadership.com. We have a ton of, content, podcasts. I have a rooftop podcast, fireside chats. And also, Sarah, I'm going to unabashedly plug the film, Last Out, Elegy of a Green Beret, will be coming out on September 11th. And so Sarah will help us promote it, I'm sure. And so just, it's a great story. It shows the power of storytelling. I'm going to throw it back to you, Sarah. If there's any questions, we still have about 5 minutes, I think, before my time is up, or comments, I'll stick around for that.
Yeah, I thank you. I was just going to ask you how people can get a hold of you. And so any other websites or anything else that you want to share for people to be able to connect with you, see your content?
Yeah, I think rooftopleadership.com, there's a ton of stuff there. Seriously, in the Rooftop podcast, we go deep on this stuff. I bring in Warren Berger, Kendall Haven, John Bell. We go deep, and then I do a lot of individual riffs on it. So if you are into this, if you want to really learn more about human nature and get into this as a skill, that would be the Rooftop podcast would be, in my assessment, the way to go, because there's no other platform where I go, deeper than this other than paid content. So I think that would really get you there. As far as the film, lastoutfilm.com. It's a great story, and it's all veterans in the cast. So yeah, I would say rooftopleadership.com and the podcast, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Scott.